If you recall, yesterday we got off to a quick start on the air, and I mentioned that Congressman Raul Labrador was scheduled to join us, and he was going to be talking about the budget deal that was crafted by the leadership in both the House and Senate in Washington. And then he was called to the floor for a vote, and he could not join us. But as the day wore on, it started to become evident that Congressman Labrador and I believe there's 39 other members of the House of Representatives who joined with him in something called the Freedom Caucus. And they were starting to look at this budget deal, and they had some reservations. So we've got a new fight that's beginning to boil in Washington. I was looking over some of the details on this and what it's going to mean for the average taxpayer, that is, you, and what it's going to mean in the long run for the country. And you've got to ask yourself, how are we any better off now than we were before some of the changes that were made, such as John Boehner being removed and put out to pasture by the Republican Party? Well, a few notes on this budget. One passage that I read said it's about 2,000 pages long. There's an additional 1,000 pages to explain the 2,000 pages. And this was all dumped on the desks of legislators, that is, members of the House and Senate, at the last minute. And they were told, this is the deal we've worked out with the Democrats. Yes, we now greatly outnumber them, but we decided to sit down and horse trade with them. And we've come to a conclusion that we're going to keep spending money in ever widening bucket loads of money, that is, that we simply don't have. So once more, Republicans told you they were going to do all of these wonderful things for you once they got control of the House and Senate, which they have had control of for quite some time now. And then they told you they were going to follow through on a number of issues that were important to you. And once again, they've ignored you, hoping that as we head for the Christmas holiday, you're too distracted to pay a whole lot of attention to this, and they don't think you're bright enough to remember it next year when it comes time to go to the polls. Stephen Dinan, writing at the Washington Times, has this. Headline, tax deal doles out year-end goodies for NASCAR tracks, racehorses, and college students. Also, for the filmmaking industry, we should point out. The deal explicitly exempts itself from budget rules that normally require all new spending or tax cuts to be offset by tax increases or spending cuts elsewhere in the budget. So why did we have all of this run up, and why did these Republicans tell us, if you support us, if you give us the majority, we'll do all of these things? And once again, they do not. Why is it they continue to believe they can hoodwink, that they can lie to the public, and that there will be no repercussions? And then they wonder why a guy like Donald Trump is leading the polls in the Republican Party, and why over among the Democrats, even Bernie Sanders has at least a strong showing going on. It's almost as if they think they can ride it out. And if they just continue to lie to you, or perhaps they figure they'll just send in the military and crush you. I don't know. You might have a better explanation of the mindset that these people currently have going on. I have plenty more on this. This comes from Salon.com, or Slate, excuse me, which is a liberal publication. The Paul Ryan Compromise. A friend of mine posted Ryan's photograph this morning on Facebook, and of course Ryan has grown a full beard, and he said he looks like a blue-eyed terrorist. So apparently he's joined the other side. The writer Jim Newell says the new speaker's first big deal is just like all of the ones that infuriated conservatives under John Boehner. So same old, same old. To be fair, though, the writer says, Ryan, the buzzer-beating legislating has more to do with workload and deadlines that Boehner left behind than anything Ryan did wrong. In other words, we liberals are happy that he cut a deal with us. So it's not Ryan's fault, you see. He's a good guy because he's starting to lean our way. And those bad conservatives out there, he's going to give them a what for. He says the Zadroga Act, a health care and compensation fund for 9/11 first responders and nearby workers, will be reauthorized. And you're saying, well, okay, I can at least understand that one. Some of those people are dealing 15 years later with some severe health problems related to what they inhaled when they were working on the cleanup at the scenes of those attacks. However, it has been reauthorized until 2090. which raises the question, will any of those people still be alive at the time? When you figure that most of the responders were in their 20s and 30s at the time, and now we're reauthorizing this, I don't know, 75 years into the future, it seems to me that that might be a bit of a stretch. So this is what your legislators in Washington have been doing while you've been watching football and thinking about Santa Claus and thinking about all of the nice presents you might be getting this year. 12 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Just point out, if you'd like to reach the program, you can give me a telephone call this morning, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And my email address, bill.colley, last name spelled Colley, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. The Daily Signal, which I have highly recommended on this show, that all of you read, and if possible, that if you have the opportunity, that you signed up, go sign up for the Daily Callers, or Daily Signal, that is, the Daily Signal's daily email. So when you get up in the morning, it'll be there, and there's usually 4 or 5 juicy headlines about what's going on in Washington and giving you the real truth and the dirt behind the scenes. Because you need to know these things so you can keep track of these scoundrels. And the headline here is, what's wrong with the massive omnibus spending bill? Lawmakers are being asked to sign off on 2,200 pages with the additional 1,000 pages of explanatory materials at the 11th hour without having had sufficient time to analyze its contents. Well, it means higher spending. We are running huge deficits still every year. Everyone says, well, they're not quite as big as they were a few years ago. Well, that's because we haven't had a stimulus package in a few years. Give that a few more months, and there'll likely be another call for bailing out somebody's buddy on Wall Street. Here's another one. Higher spending with gimmicks. And it goes into some background on that. That's why I think you should be reading this today. And it actually gives you a breakdown on numbers and how a lot of what's happening is just simply flimflammery when it comes to budget time. How they hide money and play a shell game with it. Also, sanctuary cities have been spared. Now, we heard Republicans say, we'll bring an end to those Democrats nullifying the law of the land. They're ignoring it. But then they didn't make any changes. So the sanctuary cities are going to continue doing what they're doing. Now, the federal government could have gone to San Francisco or any of the other 349 sanctuary cities and counties and said, no more money coming from Washington, we're turning the spigot off until you enforce federal laws. Simple as that. Guess what? Didn't happen. In other words, wink, wink, nod, nod, go ahead and keep violating the law and keep offending the American people. And, because who are they, after all? All they do is pay the taxes and serve us, right? They no longer serve you, obviously, from what you've been hearing this morning. No additional assurances on vetting refugees. Gee, for the last 4 to 5, 6 weeks, we've heard that this is going to happen. We are going to crack down. We are going to ensure that no terrorist slips into this country. But, all right, we'll forget that one for now, too. So they've dropped that. How can they come look at you with a straight face after making all of these promises and then, because they'll show up occasionally at a town hall or at a firehouse somewhere and make a few rounds, and they'll tell people, well, yes, but when it framished and flamished and it finished, yes, and if you connect the azimuth to the vermouth to the Lindenmuth, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And they'll just throw gibberish at you to try to get out from under all of this, because it's practiced and rehearsed. Planned Parenthood affiliates, still funded. Gee willikers, majority Republicans in both houses of Congress, and we heard we will not be funding Planned Parenthood anymore because they're selling body parts from dead babies. Oh, well, wait a minute. Tell you what, forget about that. We'll go ahead and keep funding them and pay no attention to all of those dead babies behind the curtain. How about this? It says failure to protect conscience rights. In other words, when it comes to various people around the country who are Christians and say they can't comply with certain laws, especially the new laws, healthcare and the like, that have been foisted upon them over the last several years, nope. After all the promises that we'll make sure that you can have your faith and that we will not force you as a government to violate that faith, well, forget about it. We want to go home for Christmas too, so, quit your yapping and just go back to church and close the doors. And when you come back out after church is over, remember, you cannot take your faith with you. Your faith has to stay in the church, And when you're back out on the street, sorry, you have no protections, no longer any First Amendment rights. How about this? A 5-year extension of the wind production tax credit. Even though wind power, and I think that many of you know this, comes down to wind power, we really haven't seen any great boon from that, at least not the promise that was made. I was driving from Nampa back to Twin Falls the other day and looking at all of the giant whirligigs, the pinwheels out there on the horizon, and you stop and you realize in order for that to actually power the United States and something above a third world economy, you'd have to have those things planted from coast to coast. And then you wouldn't have any room for driving or farming or anything else you might plan to do during the course of a day. 5-year extension of the solar investment tax credit. In other words, lots of friends of Barack Hussein Obama and Hillary Clinton will continue to get your tax money. Well, they say it's not a direct funding of that. It's a tax credit. But somebody else has to pick up the slack because spending's going up. So they get a break on taxes. You'll pay more taxes. And they'll get away with profiting on a product that they have that they can't sell. How about this? A handout to the oil industry. The legislation would provide a targeted tax credit for small independent refiners and allow independents to exempt 75% of transportation costs when calculating their manufacturing deductions. But once more, they'll pay less, but government spending will go up, so the government will have to find the money elsewhere. The government will come and take it away from you. You aren't getting any of these benefits. There has been no change to the EPA water rule, so the EPA can still try to come into your hometown or on your farm or your ranch and bully you and tell you that they're going to regulate your land because you have a couple of water puddles out there. That's still a possibility. How about this? Repeals mandatory country of origin labeling. So if you wanted to know when you go buy those peaches, were they grown in the USA or are they coming here from China? Sorry, you will no longer be able to know that. But they're looking out for you, aren't they? How about this? Obamacare's taxes. A 2-year moratorium, that means a suspension on Obamacare's medical device tax, is also included in the bill. It's a bad tax, the writer says, but suspending it should not be confused with repealing Obamacare. So in other words, that promise, too, has gone by the wayside. Just think for a moment. Just think for a moment what type of government we have, who that government serves, because it certainly doesn't serve any of us. And don't forget this. When you see these people at various events or on the streets, it's time to get right in their faces any longer and tell them no, 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 and no. Because we obviously can come up with something a darn sight better than what we currently have. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of that refugee moratorium that may not happen or will not happen, some thoughts from a guy who's just about ready to drop out of the Republican Party race, a guy named Jeb Bush, on that very subject in just a moment.